The smell of burning incense couldn't mask the stench of my own doubt. I am Admiral Thaddeus Kane, void-born servant of the Golden Throne, and today I committed the ultimate heresy. I asked, what if? 3 standard hours ago, unknown vessels emerged from impossible space, bearing humans who claimed kinship, yet spoke of coexistence with Xenos as casually as discussing the weather. My commissar's hand rests on his bolt pistol, counting my words for sedition. You cannot imagine the terror of discovering that everything you believed about human survival might be wrong. These Federation representatives smile while describing peaceful cooperation with alien species that should be purged on sight. Their technology operates without machine spirits or ritual blessing, yet functions with impossible efficiency. They've opened a door that the Imperium welded shut 10,000 years ago. This confession may damn us all. Chapter 1. The Diplomatic Paradox. The command deck of the Righteous Fury thrummed with the familiar harmony of machine spirits and human devotion. Servitor banks processed navigation data, while my bridge crew maintained their eternal vigil against the darkness between stars. For 37 years, this Apocalypse-class battleship had been my sanctum, my weapon, and my home. The smell of incense from the shrine dedicated to the God Emperor mixed with the ozone of plasma conduits, creating an atmosphere that spoke of faith, duty, and the eternal war against humanity's enemies. Admiral, Lieutenant Vex reported from the communications station, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused on incoming data. We're receiving signals on frequencies that shouldn't exist. The patterns, they're Xenos in origin, but the mathematical principles seem familiar somehow. I moved across the command platform, my ceremonial cape trailing behind me. The servo skull hovering near my shoulder projected tactical displays that made no sense. Whatever was transmitting these signals had technology that operated on principles the Adeptus Mechanicus would classify as impossible heresy, yet the underlying physics seemed almost elegant. Time to intercept? I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. 17 minutes, my lord. The object is massive, approximately 12 kilometers in length, but its mass readings are inconsistent with any known Imperial or Xenos vessel classification. It's as if the ship exists partially outside normal space-time. Commissar Drex stepped forward from his position near the chapel entrance, his storm coat rustling with each measured movement. His bionic hand rested casually on his bolt pistol grip, a gesture that had preceded the execution of 300 suspicious crew members over the years. Admiral Kane, I recommend immediate weapons targeting. Any vessel employing unknown technology represents a clear threat to the Imperium's security. I had worked with Drex long enough to understand his value, but also to recognize when his zealotry might prove counterproductive. Commissar, the vessel shows no hostile intent. Our orders from Battlefleet Command are specific. Investigate any anomalous contacts in this sector and report findings. We cannot report on wreckage. The truth was more complex than I could admit, even to myself. For the past 6 months, our patrol route had taken us through regions where reality itself seemed unstable. Ships appeared and vanished without explanation. Astropathic communications carried undertones of impossible concepts: peace between species, cooperation without conquest, exploration driven by curiosity rather than expansion. The Inquisition had classified these incidents as warp phenomenon requiring investigation. But I suspected something far more dangerous was occurring. Admiral, the vessel is hailing us, Vex announced, his voice carrying a note of confusion that veteran officers rarely displayed. They're transmitting in low Gothic, but the accent is strange, almost archaic, as if they learned our language from ancient texts. Put it through. The main display screen activated, revealing an image that challenged everything I thought I knew about humanity's place in the universe. The figure addressing us was undeniably human. No mutations, no signs of chaos corruption, no augmetic enhancement beyond what might be considered purely functional. He wore a uniform that seemed designed for exploration rather than war, its colors somehow managing to convey both authority and approachability. His bearing suggested military training, but without the hardened edge that constant warfare carved into Imperial officers. I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. We come in peace, seeking dialogue and understanding between our peoples. Commissar Drex's hand tightened on his weapon, and I could hear him muttering prayers against corruption under his breath. Several bridge crew members made the sign of the Aquila, their training taking over when faced with the impossible. Here was a human speaking of peace with aliens, of exploration without conquest, of cooperation with species that the Imperium would rightfully classify as dangerous Xenos filth. This is Admiral Kane of the Imperial Navy battleship Righteous Fury. Identify your origin and explain your presence in Imperial space. My response was carefully formal, buying time while my tactical officers analyzed the vessel's capabilities. We originate from what you might call a parallel iteration of human development. Our records suggest a common ancestry, though our civilizations have evolved along dramatically different paths. We've detected your massive fleet movements and wish to establish peaceful relations to prevent any misunderstanding that might lead to unnecessary conflicts. The audacity of the statement struck me like a physical blow. This Captain Picard spoke of preventing conflict with the Imperium as if he possessed the military capability to make such confidence meaningful. Our initial scans had revealed weapon systems that operated on principles unknown to the Adeptus Mechanicus, shield technology that seemed to violate conservation of energy laws, and faster-than-light communication methods that didn't rely on astropathic transmission. Captain, I replied, choosing my words carefully while aware that every syllable was being recorded for later inquisitorial review. The Imperium of Man has defended humanity for 10,000 years against threats you cannot imagine. Our protocols for first contact with unknown vessels are based on bitter experience with Xenos corruption and chaos infiltration. We understand your caution, Admiral. Our own history includes conflicts with hostile species. However, we've found that peaceful coexistence is not only possible, but beneficial to all parties involved. We've successfully maintained alliances with several species that I believe your classification system would consider Xenos. The bridge fell silent except for the mechanical humming of cogitators and the distant chanting from the ship's chapel. Every person present understood that we had just heard someone casually admit to what the Imperium would classify as the most heinous form of heresy imaginable: voluntary cooperation with alien species. Commissar Drex stepped forward, his face pale with righteous fury. Admiral, this creature admits to consorting with Xenos. Imperial law requires immediate purging of such corruption. Captain Picard's image remained calm despite somehow hearing Drex's comment through our supposedly secure communication channel. I assure you, Commissar, that our relationships with other species are built on mutual respect and shared values. We've found that most conflicts arise from misunderstanding rather than fundamental incompatibility. The fact that he had heard Drex's private comment and responded to it by rank and role suggested surveillance capabilities that made my skin crawl. Yet his tone remained diplomatic, even friendly, as if discussing the weather rather than concepts that could trigger a sector-wide purge. Admiral Kane, Picard continued, I propose a limited cultural exchange. A small delegation from each of our vessels could meet under carefully controlled conditions. This would allow us to understand each other's perspectives while maintaining appropriate security protocols. I found myself considering the proposal, which should have been automatic grounds for my own execution. The rational part of my mind catalogued the tactical advantages: intelligence gathering on unknown technology, assessment of potential threats, and compliance with Battlefleet Command's orders to investigate anomalous contacts. The irrational part whispered dangerous questions about what we might learn from people who had achieved peace among the stars. Captain, such a meeting would require extensive preparation and security measures. What guarantee do you offer regarding the safety of any Imperial personnel? Our technology includes medical and transport systems that can ensure complete safety for both parties. We could begin with a simple transmission exchange, cultural information rather than technical data. This would allow us to establish trust before any physical contact. Commissar Drex activated his Voxcaster to broadcast throughout the ship. All crew members are reminded that consorting with Xenos or their allies represents high treason, punishable by immediate execution. Any personnel exhibiting signs of corruption will be dealt with according to imperial law. The announcement had its intended effect. Crew members throughout the bridge recommitted themselves to their duties with renewed religious fervor. Yet I noticed something troubling in their expressions. Instead of the automatic revulsion that mention of Xenos cooperation should have triggered, I detected curiosity. These were hardened Void warriors who had spent decades fighting enemies of mankind. Yet something about Captain Picard's manner had planted seeds of questions that violated everything they had been taught to believe. "Captain Picard," I said, making a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my days. "I am authorized to engage in limited information exchange for intelligence gathering purposes. However, any attempt to spread seditious ideas among my crew will result in immediate hostile action." "Understood, Admiral. We have similar concerns about protecting our own people from ideas that might prove harmful. Perhaps we could begin with historical information, how our respective civilizations developed their current forms." Over the next 4 hours, we exchanged data files that should have been classified as dangerous heretical material. The Federation had somehow achieved a technological civilization without the necessity of servitors, without the guidance of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and without the protective fanaticism that kept humanity alive in a hostile universe. Their history spoke of gradually expanding cooperation, peaceful resolution of conflicts, and voluntary unity among diverse populations. More disturbing was their account of species integration. They described Vulcans as logical beings who had overcome their violent past through philosophical discipline. Klingons were portrayed as honorable warriors who channeled their aggressive nature into protecting rather than conquering. Andorians, Betazoids, and dozens of other species were presented as partners in exploration and mutual defense, rather than threats to be eliminated. As I reviewed their data, a horrifying thought began to form. What if the Federation's approach wasn't the result of naivety or corruption? What if their peaceful coexistence was possible because they had found solutions to problems that the Imperium considered inherently unsolvable? The thought was heretical beyond measure, yet I couldn't dismiss it entirely. Their technology suggested a level of advancement that should have attracted the attention of Chaos or hostile Xenos, yet their civilization had apparently survived and thrived for centuries. Either they possessed defensive capabilities that made the Imperium's endless warfare unnecessary, or their approach to interspecies relations had somehow eliminated the threat that we spent our lives fighting. "Admiral," Lieutenant Vex announced, "Captain Picard is requesting permission to send over a small diplomatic team. He suggests meeting in one of our auxiliary bays under whatever security protocols we deem appropriate." I stared at the tactical display showing both vessels. The Enterprise could have destroyed us with weapons we didn't understand, yet they continued requesting permission for peaceful contact. Their behavior suggested either supreme confidence in their defensive capabilities or genuine commitment to their stated peaceful intentions. "Commissar Drex, prepare a security detail. Full armor, blessed weapons, and purity seals for all personnel. If these Federation representatives are what they claim to be, we'll need evidence for our report to Battlefleet Command. If there's some form of chaos corruption, we'll purge them before they can spread their influence." As I watched the Federation vessel prepare its diplomatic shuttle, I couldn't shake the feeling that our next few hours would change everything I thought I knew about humanity's destiny among the stars. The questions they had already planted in my mind were dangerous enough. Face-to-face contact with beings who had achieved what the Imperium considered impossible might prove either enlightening or catastrophically corrupting. Either way, there was no turning back. Chapter 2. The Heretical Questions. The auxiliary bay had been transformed into what Commissar Drex called a contamination assessment chamber. Sacred banners hung from every alcove, their high Gothic inscriptions reminding all present of humanity's divine destiny and the Emperor's protection against alien corruption. 20 Imperial Guardsmen stood at attention in full carapace armor, their lasguns charged and aimed at the designated landing zone. Servo skulls equipped with Auspex scanners circled overhead like mechanical angels of death, their machine spirits programmed to detect any trace of Chaos Taint or Xeno's influence. I stood behind a reinforced barrier that could withstand a grenade blast, wearing my finest dress uniform, with every medal and honor marking I had earned in 6 decades of Imperial service. The ceremonial power sword at my side had been blessed by 3 different chaplains and inscribed with litanies of protection. If these Federation representatives proved to be demons or shape-shifting Xenos, I wanted them to face their destruction, knowing they had been defeated by a true servant of the Emperor. "Admiral," reported Tech Adept Caney through the Vox network, "the approaching shuttle operates on principles that violate several fundamental laws of physics as understood by orthodox Mechanicus doctrine. Its propulsion system generates no detectable exhaust signature, yet maintains consistent acceleration curves. The hull materials appear to be standard metals, but arranged in molecular patterns that shouldn't be structurally possible. Any signs of warp corruption or Xenos technology? Negative on both counts. The vessel reads as purely mechanical, constructed using advanced engineering principles rather than esoteric forces. If anything, their technology appears more elegant than corrupted. The word elegant, when applied to unknown technology, made my skin crawl. The Adeptus Mechanicus taught that truly advanced machinery required the blessing of the machine god and strict adherence to approved patterns. Technology that achieved superior results through simplicity and efficiency rather than religious observance suggested either heretical innovation or alien influence. Commissar Drex activated his helmet Vox, so his voice echoed throughout the bay. "Remember, you are warriors of the Emperor. You have sworn oaths to protect humanity from all forms of corruption. Do not allow these beings to plant seeds of doubt regarding humanity's righteous path." The Federation shuttle settled onto the deck with mechanical precision that rivaled Imperial Navy landing protocols, yet without the ritual incantations and ceremonial procedures that blessed every Imperial vehicle operation. 3 figures emerged, wearing uniforms that somehow managed to convey both military discipline and civilian accessibility. Their leader matched the Captain Picard we had seen on the viewing screen, a man whose bearings suggested extensive command experience tempered by intellectual curiosity rather than religious fanaticism. His companions were immediately more problematic. One appeared to be a standard human female wearing commander's insignia, her manner suggesting tactical competence equal to any Imperial officer. The third figure was clearly not human, possessing pointed ears and features that indicated alien ancestry. Yet he moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being treated as an equal rather than a barely tolerated servitor. "I am Captain Picard. This is Commander Riker, my first officer, and Lieutenant Commander Data, our operations officer." He gestured toward his companions with casual familiarity that implied long-term professional relationships rather than mere tolerance of alien presence. Commissar Drex's bolt pistol cleared its holster with practiced speed, aimed directly at the alien's head. "Admiral, the creature openly admits to being non-human. Imperial protocol demands immediate purging." Data tilted his head with curious precision, studying Drex as if he were an interesting scientific specimen. "I am indeed artificial rather than biological, though I was created by human scientists using advanced positronic technology. I serve aboard a Starfleet vessel with organic crew members who consider me a valued colleague." The casual admission that they had created artificial intelligence and granted it equal status with humans sent shocked murmurs through the assembled guardsmen. The Imperium's prohibition against thinking machines was absolute. The legacy of the Dark Age of technology had taught humanity that artificial minds inevitably led to rebellion and corruption. "An artificial intelligence that thinks it's alive," Drex snarled. "This is exactly the kind of heretical technology that destroyed human civilization before the Emperor's Great Crusade." Captain Picard stepped forward slightly, not threateningly, but with the confidence of someone accustomed to diffusing tense situations. "Commissar, I understand your concern. Our own history includes conflicts with artificial intelligences that became hostile to their creators. However, Lieutenant Commander Data represents a different approach, an artificial being designed from the beginning to serve alongside humans rather than replace them. Service implies the possibility of disobedience, I interjected, genuinely curious about their response. How do you ensure the loyalty of a machine that thinks independently? Data answered for himself, which was somehow more disturbing than if Picard had spoken on his behalf. Admiral, my ethical subroutines are designed around core principles of preserving life and serving the greater good. However, I am capable of questioning orders that violate these principles, just as organic crew members might refuse illegal commands. The implications hit me like a lash bolt to the chest. They had created artificial intelligence with moral autonomy, the capability to judge right from wrong independently rather than through programmed obedience. Such a being could, theoretically, question the fundamental assumptions underlying imperial civilization if it determined those assumptions to be harmful. Commander Riker seemed to sense the tension and addressed it directly. Admiral, we understand that our society has developed differently from yours. We're not here to judge or convert, merely to understand. Perhaps we could discuss the practical challenges our civilizations face rather than philosophical differences. I gestured toward a meeting table that had been set up in the center of the bay, surrounded by enough firepower to level a small building. Very well. Tell me how the Federation maintains order across multiple star systems without the centralized authority structure that holds the Imperium together. Picard settled into his chair with the ease of someone accustomed to diplomatic negotiations. Our member worlds retain significant autonomy while contributing to shared goals like exploration, defense, and scientific advancement. The Federation Council makes decisions affecting multiple species, but individual worlds maintain their own governments and cultural practices. And when those individual governments make decisions that threaten Federation security, Commissar Drex asked, his bolt pistol still drawn but lowered, how do you prevent rebellion or corruption without the authority to impose order? We've found that voluntary cooperation is more stable than imposed obedience, Commander Riker replied. When member worlds face genuine threats, they typically request Federation assistance rather than resist it. Our mutual defense agreements mean that protecting one member protects all members. The concept was so alien to Imperial thinking that several guardsmen exchanged glances of confusion. The Imperium maintained order through fear, faith, and overwhelming force. The idea that planets might voluntarily remain loyal because they benefited from cooperation rather than suffered consequences for rebellion challenged everything we had been taught about human nature. Data continued the explanation with mechanical precision. Statistical analysis indicates that coerced cooperation produces short-term compliance but long-term instability. Voluntary association based on mutual benefit generates sustainable alliances that strengthen over time rather than requiring increasing enforcement measures. But how do you deal with worlds that harbor alien influences or chaos corruption? I asked, genuinely puzzled by their apparent naivety. Surely some threats require immediate action regardless of local preferences. Captain Picard's expression grew more serious. We do face external threats that require military response. However, we found that most conflicts arise from misunderstanding rather than fundamental incompatibility. When we encounter hostile species, we attempt communication and negotiation before resorting to force. Commissar Drex laughed harshly. Captain, you've obviously never faced orcs or tyranids. Some species exist only to destroy. Negotiation with such creatures is not just futile, it's suicidal. Actually, Data interjected, we have encountered species that initially appeared completely hostile. The Borg, for example, are cybernetic entities that assimilate other species into their collective consciousness. However, we discovered that their behavior stems from a desire for perfection rather than malice. While still dangerous, understanding their motivations allowed us to develop more effective defensive strategies. The casual mention of cybernetic entities that assimilated other species should have triggered immediate weapons fire from every Imperial soldier present. Instead, I found myself asking, how do you defend against an enemy that converts your own people into weapons against you? Commander Riker leaned forward, his expression indicating that this was a subject of personal experience. Admiral, The Borg taught us that some threats require military response combined with technological innovation. We developed defensive measures that prevented assimilation while maintaining our principles of avoiding unnecessary killing. The key was understanding that the Borg weren't evil in any recognizable sense. They were following their nature just as we follow ours. The idea that enemies could be understood rather than simply destroyed was so fundamentally heretical that I struggled to formulate a response. The Imperium's survival depended on the absolute conviction that humanity's enemies were corrupt, alien, and irredeemable. To suggest that they might have motivations that could be understood and potentially redirected challenged the theological foundations of our civilization. "Captain," I said carefully, "the Imperium has faced threats for 10,000 years that defy your optimistic assumptions. The forces of chaos actively seek to corrupt and destroy everything we hold sacred. Orcs reproduce through warfare and violence. Tyranids consume entire worlds to fuel their expansion. How does peaceful negotiation address enemies that are fundamentally incompatible with human survival?" Picard considered the question thoughtfully before responding. "Admiral, we don't claim that peaceful solutions exist for every conflict. However, we've learned that assuming hostility often creates the very conflicts we're trying to prevent. When we approach other species with the expectation that cooperation is possible, we often find ways to coexist that benefit everyone involved." Data added with characteristic precision. Statistical models suggest that aggressive first contact protocols increase the likelihood of long-term conflict by approximately 340% compared to diplomatic approaches. Even species initially classified as hostile often prove amenable to negotiated solutions when presented with alternatives to warfare. I stared at these three individuals who spoke casually about statistical analysis of interspecies conflict, voluntary cooperation spanning multiple star systems, and artificial intelligence with moral autonomy. Everything they represented should have been impossible according to Imperial doctrine. Yet here they stood as living proof that alternative approaches to human survival might actually work. "How many species belong to your Federation?" I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. "Currently, we have formal treaties with over 150 species and informal relationships with several hundred more," Commander Riker replied. "The Federation itself includes roughly 40 core member species, though the number changes as new worlds petition for membership." The numbers were staggering. The Imperium had spent 10 millennia eliminating alien species to protect humanity, yet the Federation apparently thrived through voluntary association with more alien species than the Imperium had encountered in total. Either these humans had developed defensive capabilities that made such association safe, or their fundamental assumptions about interspecies relations were more accurate than ours. Commissar Drex had gone pale beneath his storm coat, his training warring with the evidence before his eyes. "Admiral, this conversation has gone far beyond intelligence gathering. We're listening to seditious material that could corrupt our crew's loyalty to the Emperor." Captain Picard turned to address Drex directly, his tone remaining diplomatic despite the obvious threat. "Commissar, we're not asking you to abandon your beliefs or change your society. We're simply sharing our experience in hopes that it might provide useful perspective. Different approaches to survival doesn't mean one is wrong and the other right." "Yes, it does," Drex replied firmly. "The Emperor's path is the only path that ensures human survival. Any deviation from his teachings leads to corruption and destruction." Data tilted his head with mechanical curiosity. "That is an interesting theological position. However, our existence demonstrates that alternative approaches are at least theoretically viable. Could it be possible that multiple paths to survival exist, each suited to different circumstances?" The question hung in the air like a virus waiting to infect vulnerable minds. I could see my crew struggling with concepts that challenged everything they had been taught to believe. The Federation representatives weren't obviously corrupt or evil. They seemed genuinely committed to human welfare through methods that contradicted Imperial doctrine, which raised the most dangerous question of all. What if the Emperor's way wasn't the only way to ensure humanity's survival among the stars? Chapter 3. Seeds of Doubt. The medical bay of the Righteous Fury had been converted into an interrogation chamber, though the Federation delegation insisted on calling it a cultural exchange facility. Magos biologist Vaughn supervised a battery of sacred instruments designed to detect every form of corruption known to Imperial science. Servo skulls equipped with pict recorders documented every gesture and expression, while cogitator banks analyzed speech patterns for signs of hypnotic manipulation or subliminal corruption. I sat across from Captain Picard at a metal table that had been sanctified with holy oils and inscribed with protective wards. Commissar Drex stood behind me, his storm coat draped over a chair to reveal the extensive collection of execution implements he carried. 3 different chaplains had blessed the room, and incense burners filled the air with purifying smoke that should have made any demonic entity immediately uncomfortable. Yet Captain Picard seemed completely at ease, occasionally sipping from a cup of what he called Earl Grey tea, with the calm confidence of someone attending a social gathering rather than a heresy investigation. "Admiral," he began, setting down his cup with careful precision. "I've been reviewing the historical data you shared about your civilization's development. The scope of conflicts you've faced is truly staggering. 10,000 years of continuous warfare against forces that seem designed specifically to corrupt or destroy humanity. The price of survival," I replied, watching for any signs of mockery or condescension. "The universe is hostile to human life. Only constant vigilance and absolute faith preserve our species from extinction." Picard nodded thoughtfully. "I don't question your assessment of the threats you've faced. However, I'm curious about the cost-benefit analysis of your defensive strategies. Has continuous warfare strengthened humanity's position? Or has it perhaps limited your civilization's development in other areas?" The question struck me as subtly dangerous. Questioning the effectiveness of Imperial strategy was tantamount to questioning the Emperor's wisdom, yet Picard's tone suggested genuine intellectual curiosity rather than seditious intent. "Captain, the Imperium controls over 1 million worlds and has survived longer than any previous human civilization. Our methods work because they're based on 10,000 years of bitter experience with humanity's enemies." "Undoubtedly," Picard agreed. "But has that survival come at the cost of advancement? Your technology appears to have remained relatively static for millennia, while your society has become increasingly rigid and militarized. Might there be alternative approaches that preserve humanity while allowing for growth and development?" Commissar Drex stepped forward, his hand resting on his bolt pistol grip. "Captain, you're suggesting that the Emperor's Great Crusade was somehow flawed or inadequate. Such thoughts constitute heresy of the highest order." Data, who had been silently observing the interaction, tilted his head with mechanical precision. "Commissar, could it be possible that strategies appropriate for one set of circumstances might become less optimal as conditions change? Military doctrine typically evolves to address new threats rather than maintaining fixed approaches regardless of effectiveness." The artificial being's calm analysis was somehow more disturbing than open hostility would have been. He spoke of military doctrine and tactical evolution as if these were purely practical considerations rather than sacred truths handed down by the Emperor himself. "Your machine speaks of military doctrine as if warfare were merely a practical problem to be solved," Drex replied coldly. "The Imperium's strategies are based on divine revelation and 10,000 years of proven success." Commander Riker leaned forward, his expression suggesting that he had extensive experience with this type of philosophical discussion. "Commissar, we're not questioning your Emperor's wisdom or your civilization's achievements. We're simply observing that different environments might require different solutions. The Federation developed in a region of space with different threats and opportunities than those you faced." "What threats?" I asked, genuinely curious about how their peaceful civilization had managed to survive at all. "If you don't face enemies like Chaos or Orcs, what challenges required you to develop advanced military capabilities?" Captain Picard smiled slightly, though his expression remained serious. "Admiral, We've encountered many of the same fundamental challenges your civilization faces, though perhaps in different forms. Hostile species, internal conflicts, resource scarcity, and the temptation to use power for destructive purposes. The difference lies in how we've chosen to address these challenges. Data activated a small device that projected holographic displays showing various alien species. For example, the Klingon Empire was initially hostile to Federation expansion. They possessed advanced military technology and a culture that valued conquest and personal honor through combat. Rather than attempting to destroy them, we invested significant resources in understanding their society and finding common ground. The holographic Klingons looked disturbingly similar to orcs in some ways, large, aggressive humanoids with advanced weapons and a culture centered on warfare. Yet the display showed them working alongside Federation personnel in what appeared to be cooperative ventures. "How did you convert warriors into allies?" I asked, fascinated despite myself by the tactical implications. Commander Riker answered with the confidence of personal experience. "We discovered that Klingon aggression stemmed from a deeply ingrained honor code rather than simple bloodlust. Once we understood that they respected strength and honesty, we were able to establish relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear or submission." Commissar Drex laughed harshly. "Respect for Xenos honor codes? Captain, you've just described the first step toward corruption. The moment humans begin to respect alien values, they begin to question human values." "Actually," Data interjected, "statistical analysis suggests the opposite. Societies that maintain strong internal values while respecting external differences tend to be more stable and adaptable than those that define themselves primarily through opposition to others." The artificial being's casual contradiction of fundamental imperial doctrine should have triggered immediate violence from every person in the room. Instead, I found myself asking, "What do you mean by internal values?" Picard answered before Data could respond, his tone carrying the weight of personal conviction. "Admiral, the Federation is built on principles we consider fundamental to human dignity. The belief that all sentient beings have inherent worth, that cooperation produces better outcomes than domination, and that knowledge and understanding are preferable to ignorance and fear." "And when those principles conflict with survival," Drex demanded, "when cooperation with aliens results in human deaths, or when understanding leads to corruption, then we adapt our methods while maintaining our principles," Commander Riker replied simply. "We've learned that abandoning our values to ensure survival often means that what survives isn't worth preserving." The statement hit me with unexpected force. The Imperium had indeed survived for 10 millennia, but what had that survival cost? We were a civilization perpetually at war, sustained by fear and maintained through oppression. Our technology had stagnated, our society had calcified, and our people lived lives of grinding hardship, broken only by moments of religious ecstasy or violent triumph. "Captain," I said carefully, "your Federation has existed for how long?" "Approximately 200 years in our current form, though some member species have maintained interstellar civilization for much longer." The number was sobering. The Federation was barely an infant compared to the Imperium's ancient majesty, yet they had achieved what we considered impossible. Either they had been incredibly fortunate in their local cosmic environment, or their approaches to the fundamental challenges of human survival were more effective than ours. Magos Biologist Vaughn approached our table, his mechanical features displaying data readouts from the various scanning devices. "Admiral," he announced in his synthesized voice, "all biological and technological scans remain negative for corruption signatures. These beings register as baseline human or engineered artificial intelligence. No traces of warp influence, Xenos genetic modification, or chaos taint. That's because we don't use the warp for faster-than-light travel," Data explained helpfully. "Our propulsion technology operates by manipulating subspace physics rather than entering what you call the immaterium." The casual mention of faster-than-light travel without navigator houses, Geller fields, or astropathic communication sent shocked murmurs through the assembled tech adepts. Such technology should have been impossible according to orthodox Mechanicus doctrine. How do you communicate across interstellar distances? Tech adept Caney asked, his curiosity overcoming his training against unauthorized technical innovation. Subspace radio transmission, Commander Riker replied. Nearly instantaneous communication across hundreds of light years without requiring psychic personnel or protective rituals. I stared at the Federation representatives with growing unease. They possessed technology that solved fundamental problems the Imperium considered inherently unsolvable. Faster than light travel without warp exposure. Instantaneous communication without psychic vulnerability. Artificial intelligence without corruption risk. Energy sources that didn't require massive industrial infrastructure. Captain Picard, I said slowly, your technology suggests scientific advancement far beyond Imperial capabilities in several areas. How do you prevent such innovation from leading to the kind of catastrophic rebellion that destroyed human civilization during the Dark Age of technology? Through careful ethical consideration and democratic oversight, Picard replied. All major technological development requires extensive peer review and public debate before implementation. We've learned that involving affected populations in decision-making processes reduces the risk of unintended consequences. Commissar Drex's face had gone pale with religious horror. Admiral, they're describing technological innovation without Adeptus Mechanicus oversight and democratic decision-making regarding sacred knowledge. This is exactly the kind of heretical thinking that led to the Age of Strife. Data tilted his head with characteristic mechanical curiosity. Could you explain the specific causal relationship between democratic governance and civilizational collapse? Our historical model suggests that distributed decision-making tends to produce more stable outcomes than concentrated authority structures. The question exposed one of the fundamental contradictions in imperial doctrine. We taught that democracy led to weakness and corruption, yet our own civilization was sustained by an elaborate bureaucracy that distributed authority among countless departments and organizations. The difference was that imperial authority ultimately derived from the emperor's divine will rather than popular consent. Democratic governance allows corruption to spread through majority opinion, I explained, reciting lessons learned in my youth at the Naval Academy. When people vote based on immediate desires rather than long-term survival needs, civilizations make decisions that feel good but prove catastrophic. Captain Picard nodded thoughtfully. A valid concern, Admiral. That's why Federation democracy includes safeguards like constitutional protections for minority rights and institutional checks on majority power. We've found that educated populations with access to accurate information tend to make better long-term decisions than authoritarian leaders operating in isolation. But education requires exposing people to potentially dangerous ideas, Drex objected. Knowledge of alien cultures, forbidden technologies, or alternative philosophies can corrupt even well-intentioned minds. Commander Riker smiled slightly. Commissar, we've found that people exposed to diverse ideas from childhood tend to be more resistant to dangerous influences than those raised in isolated environments. Knowledge itself isn't corrupting. It's ignorance that makes people vulnerable to manipulation. The assertion struck at the heart of imperial educational philosophy. We protected our citizens from dangerous knowledge precisely because exposure to alien ideas could lead them to question human superiority or imperial necessity. Yet the Federation claimed that such exposure actually strengthened rather than weakened mental resistance to corruption. You teach your children about alien cultures? I asked, somehow horrified and fascinated simultaneously. Data responded with mechanical precision. Federation educational curricula include comparative cultural studies, xenobiology, and interspecies ethics. Children learn to understand and evaluate different approaches to common problems rather than accepting single solutions without question. The implications were staggering. Federation children grew up learning to think critically about different ways of organizing society, different approaches to survival, and different definitions of success. Such an educational system would produce adults capable of questioning anything, including the fundamental assumptions that held the Imperium together. And this doesn't lead to rebellion or social chaos? Commissar Drex asked, his professional curiosity overcoming his ideological horror. Occasionally, we face internal dissent and political conflicts, Picard admitted. However, we've found that people who understand why their society works the way it does are more committed to preserving beneficial aspects while improving problematic ones. Blind obedience is less stable than informed consent. As I listened to these three individuals calmly describe a civilization built on principles that contradicted everything I had been taught about human nature and survival, a dangerous thought began forming in my mind. What if the Federation's success wasn't due to favorable circumstances or ignorant naivety? What if their approach to the fundamental challenges of interstellar civilization was actually more effective than the Imperium's methods? The thought was heretical beyond measure, yet I couldn't dismiss the evidence before my eyes. These people had achieved what we considered impossible without obviously sacrificing their humanity or falling to corruption. They had somehow found a middle path between the naive optimism that led to catastrophic vulnerability and the harsh realism that led to cultural stagnation. Which raised the most dangerous question of all. If the Federation's way worked for them, could it work for us? Chapter 4. The Point of No Return. The observation deck of the Righteous Fury had been configured as a neutral meeting space where representatives from both civilizations could interact under carefully controlled conditions. The vast transparisteel viewports showed both vessels hanging in the void like monuments to radically different approaches to human survival. The Enterprise gleamed with clean lines and integrated systems that suggested harmony between technology and human needs. My own ship displayed the Gothic magnificence of Imperial architecture, massive, ornate, and built to inspire awe and religious devotion in all who beheld it. 3 days of continuous dialogue had produced a collection of recordings that would either revolutionize Imperial understanding of interstellar civilization or result in the immediate execution of everyone involved. Captain Picard had requested this final meeting to demonstrate what he called practical cooperation between their technologies and ours. I stood beside Commissar Drex and Magos biologist Vaughn, watching as Federation technicians worked alongside Imperial tech adepts to establish a communication relay between our ships. The cooperation should have been impossible. Imperial technology required ritual blessing and sacred procedures, while Federation equipment operated through pure scientific principles. Yet somehow they were finding common ground. Admiral, Tech Adept Caney reported through his Vox grill, the Federation technicians understand machine spirit interfaces instinctively. They treat our equipment with appropriate respect while explaining functionality in terms that make perfect sense according to their scientific principles. Data worked beside Caney with mechanical precision, his artificial fingers manipulating Imperial cogitator components with a delicacy that suggested deep understanding rather than mere mimicry. Tech Adept, your machine spirit interface protocols are actually quite sophisticated emotion recognition algorithms designed to ensure optimal human-machine cooperation. The ritual aspects serve to maintain consistent user behavior patterns that promote technological reliability. I watched Caney's reaction carefully. The Tech Adept should have been horrified by Data's casual analysis of sacred machine spirit mysteries as mere technological phenomena. Instead, he seemed fascinated by the artificial being's insights into Imperial technology functionality. You understand cogitator architecture without theological training? Caney asked, his mechanical voice carrying obvious curiosity. I recognize the underlying design principles, Data replied, as he carefully adjusted a communications array that had been blessing tech adepts for decades. Your technology achieves remarkable reliability through redundant systems and human oversight protocols. The religious framework provides psychological structure that ensures consistent maintenance and operation procedures. Commissar Drex stepped closer to the work area, his hand resting on his bolt pistol grip. Are you suggesting that Imperial technology doesn't actually require the machine god's blessing to function properly? Data paused in his work, tilting his head with characteristic mechanical consideration. I am suggesting that your technology incorporates spiritual elements that serve practical functions. Whether those functions require divine intervention or operate through natural laws is ultimately a philosophical question rather than a technical one. The artificial being's diplomatic response somehow managed to acknowledge imperial religious doctrine while maintaining scientific rationality. He had found a way to respect both approaches without requiring either side to abandon their fundamental assumptions. Captain Picard approached our group, carrying a PADD that displayed detailed technical schematics. "Admiral, I wanted to show you something remarkable. Your ship's power generation systems are actually more elegant than our own in several important ways." "Impossible," Magos Vaughn interjected, his optical mechadendrites focusing on the displayed schematics. "Federation technology is clearly more advanced than orthodox Imperial designs." "More advanced in some areas," Picard corrected gently. "But your plasma reactors include safety features and efficiency modifications that our engineers find quite impressive. The religious protocols that govern their operation actually serve to optimize performance parameters we achieve through automated systems." I stared at the tactical implications of what Picard was suggesting. Imperial technology wasn't simply primitive compared to Federation capabilities. It was different, incorporating approaches that solved problems the Federation addressed through alternative methods. Both civilizations had developed effective solutions to common challenges, but using radically different philosophical frameworks. Commander Riker joined us, carrying additional display devices that showed comparative analyses of various technological systems. "Admiral, we've been running simulations based on combining certain aspects of Imperial and Federation approaches. The theoretical results are quite promising." "What kind of simulations?" Drex asked suspiciously. Data answered while continuing his work on the communications relay. "Defense systems that combine Federation shield technology with Imperial armor design. Faster-than-light communication that uses both subspace transmission and limited astropathic backup. Manufacturing processes that incorporate both automated efficiency and human quality oversight." The concept of actively combining Imperial and Federation technologies was so heretical that several nearby crew members made the sign of the Aquila and began muttering protective prayers. Yet the actual work being performed by Data and Caney suggested that such cooperation was not only possible, but potentially beneficial to both civilizations. "Captain," I said carefully, "you're describing technological collaboration that would revolutionize both our civilizations. Such changes would require fundamental alterations to social, religious, and political structures that have maintained stability for thousands of years." Picard nodded gravely. "We're not suggesting immediate or total integration, Admiral. However, limited cooperation could benefit both our peoples without requiring either civilization to abandon its core values or essential characteristics." "Limited cooperation with Xenos-allied humans," Commissar Drex said flatly. "Admiral, we're discussing heretical collaboration that violates every principle of Imperial doctrine. The corruption potential alone should terminate this conversation immediately." Captain Picard turned to address Drex directly, his tone respectful but firm. "Commissar, I understand your concerns about corruption and alien influence. However, our experience suggests that controlled contact between civilizations often strengthens both cultures by providing external perspective on internal challenges. And when that external perspective undermines faith in established authority," Drex challenged, "when people begin to question whether their traditional ways are necessary or optimal, then you address those questions through honest dialogue and factual evidence," Commander Riker replied. "If your traditions are truly beneficial, they should be able to withstand scrutiny. If they're not, then questioning them might lead to improvements that benefit everyone." The casual suggestion that Imperial traditions should be subject to questioning and potential improvement based on evidence rather than faith struck at the very foundation of our civilization. The Imperium survived because people believed absolutely in the Emperor's wisdom and the necessity of Imperial methods. Introducing doubt about those fundamental assumptions could lead to the kind of civil wars that had nearly destroyed humanity during the Age of Strife. "Commander," I said slowly, the Imperium maintains order across 1,000,000 worlds through absolute faith in established authority. Questioning that authority, even with good intentions, risks civilizational collapse on an unprecedented scale. Data looked up from his work, his artificial features displaying what might have been confusion in an organic being. Admiral, could it be possible to maintain beneficial authority structures while improving inefficient or harmful practices? Our experience suggests that gradual reform is more stable than either absolute stagnation or revolutionary change. The artificial being's logical analysis was somehow more disturbing than open sedition would have been. He wasn't suggesting that imperial authority was wrong, merely that it might be incomplete or potentially improved through careful modification. Such thinking was exactly the kind of reasonable-sounding heresy that could spread through an entire population before anyone realized the danger. Data, Picard said gently. Perhaps we should focus on technical cooperation rather than political philosophy. Some changes require generations to implement safely. I caught the subtle implication in Picard's words. The Federation wasn't suggesting immediate revolution or dramatic social transformation. They were thinking in terms of gradual evolution spanning multiple generations, exactly the kind of patient, long-term approach that could succeed where obvious corruption attempts would fail. Admiral, Tech Adept Caney announced, the communication relay is operational. We can now maintain real-time data exchange between our vessels using a hybrid of Imperial and Federation technologies. The successful technical cooperation represented a breakthrough that should have been impossible according to Orthodox doctrine. Imperial technology required divine blessing and ritual maintenance, while Federation equipment operated through pure scientific principles. Yet somehow they had found common ground that enhanced both systems without corrupting either. Magos Vaughn approached the communications array, his optical mechadendrites scanning the hybrid technology with obvious fascination. The machine spirits appear to be functioning normally despite integration with systems that operate outside approved technical parameters. This suggests either remarkable adaptability in our sacred technology or that the underlying principles are compatible, Data finished helpfully. Your machine spirits and our computer systems are actually solving similar problems using different interface methodologies. Integration preserves both approaches while enhancing overall capability. I watched Vaughn struggle with the implications of Data's analysis. The Magos biologist had devoted his life to understanding and serving the machine god through orthodox Mechanicus doctrine. Yet here was an artificial being casually demonstrating that Imperial technology could be enhanced through collaboration with systems that operated outside sacred parameters. Captain Picard, I said, making a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my days. I want to see your ship. Commissar Drex spun around to face me, his face pale with shock. Admiral, setting foot on an alien vessel represents potential corruption exposure that violates every security protocol in Imperial doctrine. The Federation represents human civilization that has developed along different paths than our own, I replied, choosing my words carefully. Intelligence gathering regarding their methods and capabilities serves legitimate Imperial interests. Captain Picard smiled slightly. Admiral, you're welcome aboard the Enterprise as our guest. I believe you'll find our approach to human survival among the stars illuminating. As I looked through the viewport at the Federation starship waiting in the void, I realized that I had already crossed the point of no return. The questions that 3 days of dialogue had planted in my mind couldn't be unanswered through simple force of will. I needed to see with my own eyes whether the Federation's claims about peaceful coexistence and cooperative governance were actually sustainable in practice. If they were, then everything I had believed about human nature and survival might be wrong. If they weren't, then I would have evidence to support Imperial doctrine and justify whatever action proved necessary to protect the Imperium from Federation influence. Either way, I had to know the truth. Commissar, I said formally, you will accompany me aboard the Federation vessel as witness to everything we observe. If corruption occurs, you have authority to take whatever action proves necessary to protect Imperial interests. Drex nodded grimly, his hand never leaving his weapon. Understood, Admiral. The Emperor protects. As we prepared to board the Federation shuttle for transport to the Enterprise, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to witness something that would change both our civilizations forever. The hybrid communication system linking our ships represented proof that cooperation was possible between radically different approaches to human survival. The question was whether that cooperation would strengthen both civilizations or destroy them. Chapter 5: Walking Among Heretics. The transporter beam deposited us directly onto the bridge of the Enterprise in a manner that should have triggered every defensive protocol in Imperial doctrine. Instantaneous matter transmission without warp involvement represented technology that could be used for assassination, infiltration, or mass troop deployment with devastating effectiveness. Yet Captain Picard had casually used their most advanced transportation system to demonstrate trust and transparency rather than tactical superiority. I stood in the center of a command facility that challenged every assumption I had developed about effective military organization. The bridge was spacious and well lit, with crew stations arranged to promote communication and cooperation rather than rigid hierarchical separation. Officers moved with calm efficiency, their uniforms clean and comfortable, rather than imposing or ceremonial. The overall atmosphere suggested scientific exploration rather than military preparedness. Commissar Drex remained beside me, his bolt pistol conspicuously holstered, but his hand ready to draw at the first sign of corruption or threat. His eyes catalogued every detail with the professional paranoia of someone trained to detect heresy in its earliest stages. I could see him struggling to reconcile the obvious competence and dedication of the Federation crew with their casual violation of fundamental Imperial principles. "Welcome aboard the Enterprise," Captain Picard said warmly. "I'd like to introduce you to some of my senior staff." A Klingon officer approached from the tactical station, his alien features clearly visible beneath what appeared to be Starfleet insignia. He moved with predatory grace that reminded me uncomfortably of Orc behavior patterns, yet his manner suggested discipline and professional courtesy rather than barely controlled violence. "This is Lieutenant Commander Worf, our Chief of Security," Picard announced. "He's been instrumental in developing defensive protocols that protect the Federation from hostile species while maintaining our principles of peaceful coexistence." I stared at the alien warrior who held a position of critical trust aboard a human vessel. Everything about the situation violated Imperial doctrine regarding Xenos reliability and the necessity of human purity in command positions. Yet Worf's bearing suggested absolute loyalty to his captain and crew, rather than the inherent treachery that Imperial training taught to expect from all non-human species. "Admiral," Worf said in a deep voice that carried obvious respect, "Captain Picard has explained your civilization's approach to defense against hostile forces. I would be honored to discuss tactical philosophy with someone who has commanded in actual combat." The alien's respectful tone and obvious military competence created cognitive dissonance that made my training seem suddenly incomplete. Imperial doctrine taught that Xenos were inherently inferior and treacherous, yet this Klingon displayed exactly the kind of professional expertise and personal honor that I valued in the finest Imperial officers. Commissar Drex stepped forward, his training warring with the evidence before his eyes. "Lieutenant Commander, your species appears to be inherently aggressive and militaristic. How does Captain Picard ensure your loyalty when your nature might conflict with Federation principles?" Worf's response was immediate and thoughtful. "Commissar, my aggressive nature serves Federation principles by directing warrior instincts toward protecting rather than conquering. Klingon honor codes emphasize loyalty to worthy leaders and defense of one's people. Captain Picard has earned my loyalty through personal courage and commitment to values I can respect." "But what happens when those values conflict with your species' natural instincts?" I asked, genuinely curious about how such integration functioned in practice. "Then I must choose between competing loyalties," Worf replied honestly. However, I have found that Federation principles often align with Klingon concepts of honor and duty. Protecting the innocent and fighting against genuine threats satisfies both my cultural background and my Starfleet obligations. Data approached from the operations station, his artificial features displaying what might have been curiosity. Admiral, Lieutenant Commander Worf represents successful integration between different value systems. Rather than requiring him to abandon Klingon culture, Starfleet has found ways to channel his cultural strengths toward mutual benefit. The concept of cultural integration, rather than cultural suppression, struck at fundamental assumptions about maintaining order in diverse populations. The Imperium controlled diversity through enforced conformity to Imperial doctrine and elimination of potentially disruptive cultural variations. Yet the Federation apparently achieved unit cohesion through voluntary adaptation that preserved beneficial aspects of different traditions. "Captain," I said carefully, "how do you maintain unit cohesion when crew members bring different cultural backgrounds and potentially conflicting value systems to their duties?" Picard gestured toward his assembled bridge crew, which I now noticed included what appeared to be representatives from several different species working together with obvious familiarity and mutual respect. "Admiral, we've found that shared commitment to common goals creates stronger bonds than forced conformity to identical methods. When people understand why their mission matters and how their unique contributions serve that mission, they perform better than when they're simply following orders." A blue-skinned female officer approached from the science station, her alien features clearly marking her as non-human, yet her manner suggesting complete integration with the human crew. She wore the same uniform and insignia as her colleagues, and her interaction with Captain Picard displayed the easy familiarity of long professional association. "This is Lieutenant Commander Troy, our ship's counselor," Picard announced. "She's been instrumental in developing our psychological support systems and crew integration protocols." The casual mention of psychological support systems immediately raised concerns about mental conditioning and thought control. Yet Troy's presence among the senior staff suggested that her role involved actual counseling rather than ideological enforcement. "Admiral," Troy said in a voice that somehow conveyed both authority and compassion, "I understand that your civilization has faced tremendous challenges that required harsh measures for survival. However, I'm curious about the psychological cost of maintaining such rigid social control." Commissar Drex's hand moved to his bolt pistol, his training recognizing a potential threat to crew loyalty and Imperial doctrine. "Counselor, psychological analysis of Imperial methods represents potential subversion of established authority structures." "I'm not suggesting that your methods are wrong," Troy replied gently. "I'm simply observing that any social system creates psychological pressures that affect individual and group performance. Understanding those pressures often helps optimize system effectiveness." The alien counselor's diplomatic response acknowledged Imperial authority, while suggesting that analysis and potential improvement were compatible with loyalty rather than threatening to it. Her approach was subtly dangerous precisely because it seemed reasonable and supportive rather than openly challenging. "What kind of psychological pressures?" I asked, despite knowing that the question itself represented a step toward potentially heretical thinking. Commander Riker answered from his position near the captain's chair. "Admiral, any system based on absolute obedience creates stress related to suppressed initiative and personal responsibility. People want to contribute meaningfully to their community's success, not just follow orders without understanding or input." Data added with characteristic precision. Statistical analysis suggests that crews allowed limited autonomy and input into decision-making processes perform approximately 23% better in crisis situations than those operating under pure command authority structures. The suggestion that Imperial command structures might be suboptimal compared to Federation alternatives struck at the heart of everything I had been taught about leadership and military effectiveness. Yet I couldn't deny that the Federation crew around us displayed exactly the kind of initiative and professional competence that Imperial doctrine claimed required absolute hierarchical control. "Captain," I said slowly, "your crew appears to operate with remarkable efficiency, despite what we would consider dangerously loose command protocols. How do you ensure mission accomplishment when subordinates are encouraged to question orders and offer alternative suggestions?" Picard smiled slightly. Admiral, we found that people who understand their mission and feel invested in its success are more likely to accomplish objectives than those who simply follow orders without comprehension. When crew members are encouraged to think creatively and offer suggestions, they often find solutions that command staff might miss. Worf stepped forward to offer a practical example. Admiral, during our encounter with the Borg Collective, junior officers provided tactical insights that proved essential to our survival. Their different perspectives and specialized knowledge contributed to developing strategies that purely hierarchical command might not have considered. The idea that junior officers might possess insights valuable to senior commanders was not entirely foreign to Imperial doctrine, but it was typically channeled through formal reporting structures, rather than open discussion and collaborative planning. The Federation approach seemed to encourage exactly the kind of initiative that Imperial training warned could lead to insubordination and command breakdown. And when junior officers disagree with command decisions, Commissar Drex asked, how do you maintain discipline and unit cohesion when authority is subject to debate? Commander Riker answered thoughtfully, Commissar, we distinguish between tactical disagreement and insubordination. Officers are encouraged to voice concerns and offer alternatives, but once command makes a final decision, everyone commits to executing that decision to the best of their ability. Data continued the explanation. The key is establishing trust between command and crew levels. When subordinates know that their input is valued and considered, they are more willing to accept decisions even when they disagree with specific choices. I watched the Federation bridge crew interact with each other and with their alien colleagues, noting the obvious mutual respect and professional competence that characterized their relationships. These people had somehow achieved the kind of unit cohesion that Imperial doctrine claimed required rigid hierarchy and absolute obedience, yet they had done so through methods that encouraged individual initiative and cross-cultural cooperation. Captain Picard, I said, making another decision that carried me further from orthodox Imperial thinking. I'd like to see how your crew handles crisis situations. Do you have training scenarios that could demonstrate Federation command protocols under pressure? Picard exchanged glances with his senior staff, and I caught a subtle communication that suggested they had anticipated this request. Admiral, we could run a tactical simulation based on scenarios similar to threats your civilization has faced. This would allow you to observe our decision-making processes under conditions comparable to Imperial operational requirements. As the bridge crew began preparing their simulation systems, I realized that I was about to witness a direct comparison between Federation and Imperial approaches to crisis management. If the Federation methods proved superior, it would raise questions about everything I had been taught regarding optimal command structure and crew management. If they proved inferior, it would confirm Imperial doctrine and justify whatever action became necessary to protect the Imperium from Federation influence. Either way, I would finally have concrete evidence rather than theoretical discussions to guide my assessment of whether these two radically different human civilizations could coexist, or whether one represented an existential threat to the other. Commissar Drex moved closer to me, speaking in a low voice that wouldn't carry to the Federation crew. Admiral, we're observing heretical command protocols that violate fundamental Imperial doctrine. The longer we remain aboard this vessel, the greater the risk of ideological contamination. I nodded acknowledgement of his concern while continuing to watch the Federation crew prepare their demonstration. Commissar, we need to understand exactly what kind of threat the Federation represents. That requires direct observation rather than assumptions based on theoretical doctrine. As the holographic simulation systems activated around us, transforming the bridge into a tactical scenario that bore uncomfortable resemblance to actual combat situations I had faced, I couldn't help wondering whether I was conducting legitimate intelligence gathering or taking the first steps toward betraying everything I had sworn to protect. The distinction, I was beginning to realize, might depend entirely on what the next few hours revealed about the relative effectiveness of Federation versus Imperial approaches to human survival among the stars. Chapter 6: The Simulation Test. The bridge of the Enterprise transformed around us as holographic projectors created a three-dimensional tactical environment that rivaled the most sophisticated Imperial command simulators. What should have been impossible technology operated with casual efficiency, generating realistic enemy vessels, environmental hazards, and strategic complications that tested every aspect of command decision-making under pressure. Captain Picard stood at the center of the simulated battlefield, his manner calm and confident, despite facing a scenario that had been specifically designed to mirror the kind of existential threats the Imperium faced on a daily basis. The tactical display showed hostile alien vessels approaching with obvious aggressive intent, their weapons charging and shields raised for combat. "Red alert," Picard announced, his voice carrying throughout the bridge with clear authority. "All hands to battle stations. Mr. Worf, raise shields and charge weapon systems." I watched with fascination as the Federation crew responded to the emergency with practiced efficiency that matched anything I had seen aboard Imperial vessels. Officers moved to their stations with purposeful haste, status reports flowed smoothly through the command structure, and defensive systems activated with mechanical precision that would have impressed even the most demanding Imperial Navy instructor. Yet something fundamental was different about their approach to crisis management. Instead of the rigid adherence to predetermined protocols that characterized Imperial responses to threat situations, the Federation crew seemed to encourage real-time analysis and adaptive planning based on immediate tactical requirements. "Captain," reported the blue-skinned science officer, Troy, from her station, "sensors indicate the hostile vessels are using some form of directed energy weapon that operates outside normal electromagnetic spectrums. Our standard defensive measures may prove inadequate." Rather than issuing immediate orders based on standing tactical doctrine, Picard turned to his senior staff for input. "Options, people. How do we adapt our defenses to counter an unknown weapons system?" Data responded with characteristic precision while his fingers flew over his control console. "Captain, I am detecting quantum resonance patterns similar to those we encountered during the Tholian incident. Modulating our shield harmonics to compensate for quantum interference might provide adequate protection." Worf added tactical considerations from the security station. "Sir, our weapons appear to be effective against their hull configuration. Concentrated phaser fire at specific structural points could disable their offensive capabilities without requiring total destruction." The collaborative approach to tactical problem-solving was both impressive and deeply disturbing from an Imperial perspective. Federation officers were encouraged to think creatively about immediate challenges rather than simply executing predetermined responses according to established doctrine. Such flexibility could lead to innovative solutions, but it also created opportunities for critical errors or hesitation during moments when immediate action was essential. "Engineering," Picard called out. "Can we implement Mr. Data's shield modifications while maintaining our current heading and speed?" The response came through the communication system with obvious competence. "Aye, Captain. Quantum harmonic adjustments will be ready in 30 seconds. However, the modifications will reduce our overall shield strength by approximately 15%. "Noted," Picard replied. "Mr. Worf, prepare to target their weapon systems the moment our shields are adapted. Counselor Troy, I want continuous assessment of their tactical behavior patterns. Are we dealing with purely aggressive species, or might there be opportunity for communication?" I found myself leaning forward to observe their crisis management more closely. The Federation command structure somehow managed to maintain clear authority while incorporating input from multiple specialists in real-time tactical adaptation. Such an approach required extraordinary trust between command and crew levels, as well as training that emphasized critical thinking over strict procedural compliance. Commissar Drex moved beside me, his expression displaying the kind of professional fascination that overcame ideological concerns when faced with superior performance. "Admiral," he said quietly, "their response time and tactical coordination are remarkable. However, the collaborative decision-making process creates vulnerability to command paralysis if crew members disagree about optimal responses." "Interesting observation, Commissar," Captain Picard said, apparently having overheard Drex's comment despite the distance and ambient noise. "That's why we train extensively in group decision-making under pressure. Our crew understands that collaborative input must lead to decisive action rather than endless debate." The holographic enemy vessels opened fire with weapons that generated visual effects unlike anything in Imperial experience. Energy beams that seemed to phase in and out of visible reality struck their modified shields, creating feedback patterns that the Federation crew analyzed in real time, rather than responding according to predetermined countermeasures. Shield effectiveness at 87%, Worf reported. Data's modifications are working, but these weapons are adapting to our defensive measures. We need alternative strategies. Rather than panic or rigid adherence to failing tactics, the Federation response demonstrated exactly the kind of adaptive flexibility that Imperial doctrine warned could lead to confused priorities and tactical mistakes. Yet their actual performance suggested that such flexibility, properly channeled, might be superior to rigid adherence to established procedures. "Mr. Data," Picard ordered, "analysis of their adaptation patterns. Can we stay ahead of their modifications?" "Affirmative, Captain," Data replied, while simultaneously adjusting defensive parameters and analyzing enemy behavior. However, their adaptation rate suggests artificial intelligence coordination. We may be facing technology similar to Borg collective systems. The casual mention of previous encounters with assimilating artificial intelligence sent chills through my Imperial Navy training. Such threats represented exactly the kind of existential danger that justified any means necessary to preserve human survival. Yet the Federation crew discussed their experience with such enemies as tactical challenges to be solved rather than theological horrors requiring absolute destruction. "Recommendations?" Picard asked, maintaining his collaborative approach even when facing what Imperial doctrine would classify as the ultimate threat to human existence. Commander Riker stepped forward from his station. "Captain, our previous Borg encounters taught us that unpredictable tactics are more effective than logical countermeasures. Maybe we should consider approaches that don't follow standard tactical doctrine." Troy added her psychological analysis. "Sir, artificial intelligence systems often struggle with responses that incorporate emotional or intuitive elements. Seemingly irrational tactics might confuse their adaptation algorithms." I watched in amazement as the Federation crew developed innovative tactical responses by combining scientific analysis with creative thinking, rather than relying on established doctrinal solutions. Their approach represented exactly the kind of dangerous flexibility that Imperial training warned could lead to heretical innovation and departure from proven methods. Yet it was working. "Mr. Worf," Picard ordered, "prepare an attack pattern that combines seemingly random maneuvers with coordinated weapons fire. Make our tactics appear desperate while actually implementing a carefully planned assault on their key systems." The resulting tactical engagement demonstrated combat effectiveness that equaled anything I had seen from elite Imperial Navy units. Federation weapons systems operated with precision and power that matched Imperial standards, while their defensive measures showed innovation that exceeded orthodox capabilities. Most importantly, their crew coordination under pressure displayed the kind of professional competence that Imperial doctrine claimed required absolute hierarchical control. "Enemy vessels are withdrawing," Worf announced as the simulated hostile forces retreated from effective Federation countermeasures. "Their adaptation algorithms appear unable to cope with our unpredictable tactical responses." As the holographic simulation concluded, leaving the bridge in its normal configuration, I found myself confronting evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about military effectiveness and command structure optimization. The Federation had successfully defeated a simulated enemy using methods that Imperial doctrine would classify as dangerously undisciplined, yet their actual performance had been exemplary. "Captain Picard," I said formally, "that was an impressive demonstration of tactical flexibility and crew coordination. Your officers performed admirably under pressure." Picard smiled slightly. "Thank you, Admiral. Our approach emphasizes adaptability and creative problem-solving, because we've learned that rigid adherence to predetermined tactics can be limiting when facing unknown threats." Data stepped forward to offer analysis. "Admiral, the simulation was designed to test collaborative decision-making under pressure. Imperial command structures would likely respond differently, but both approaches can achieve successful outcomes depending on specific circumstances and crew training. The artificial being's diplomatic acknowledgement that different command structures might have different advantages was somehow more troubling than open criticism would have been. He wasn't claiming that Federation methods were superior to Imperial approaches, merely that alternative methods were viable and potentially effective under certain conditions. Commissar Drex approached Captain Picard directly, his manner suggesting professional inquiry rather than ideological challenge. Captain, your crew's performance was indeed impressive. However, how do you prevent the collaborative decision-making process from becoming paralyzed by disagreement during critical moments? Through extensive training and clear protocols, Commander Riker answered. Our crew understands that input and discussion have time limits during crisis situations. When immediate action is required, command authority takes precedence over collaborative consultation. Worf added tactical perspective. Commissar, battle conditions require instant obedience once decisions are made. However, preparation phases allow for the kind of creative input that can improve tactical options when crisis occurs. I studied the Federation bridge crew, noting their obvious mutual respect and professional competence. These people had somehow achieved the kind of unit cohesion and tactical effectiveness that Imperial doctrine claimed required absolute hierarchy and unquestioning obedience. Yet they had done so through methods that encouraged individual initiative and collaborative problem-solving. Captain, I said slowly, your demonstration raises questions about optimal command structure and crew management approaches. Have you ever encountered situations where your collaborative methods proved inadequate or dangerous? Picard considered the question thoughtfully. Admiral, no system is perfect for every situation. We've faced crises where immediate authoritarian command was necessary, and we've learned to adapt our methods to match tactical requirements. The key is maintaining flexibility in approach while preserving core principles of mutual respect and shared commitment to mission success. As I prepared to return to my own vessel, I realized that the past few hours had provided evidence that would revolutionize my understanding of command effectiveness and crew management. The Federation had demonstrated that alternatives to Imperial methods were not only viable, but potentially superior under certain circumstances, which raised the ultimate question. If Federation approaches to human civilization were demonstrably effective, what did that mean for the Imperium's claim that our methods represented the only path to human survival among the stars? Chapter 7. Return to reality. The transporter beam deposited Commissar Drex and myself back aboard the Righteous Fury, in a swirl of energy that still seemed like impossible magic, despite multiple exposures to Federation technology. The familiar smell of incense and machine oil struck me immediately, creating sharp contrast to the clean efficiency of the Enterprise bridge. My own command deck seemed suddenly oppressive with its Gothic arches, religious iconography, and the constant undertone of fearful devotion that characterized Imperial operations. Bridge crew members who had remained at their stations during our absence looked up expectantly, their expressions showing the kind of nervous anticipation that preceded either glorious victory or terrible punishment. Lieutenant Vex stepped forward from the communications console, his augmetic eye whirring as it focused on my face to analyze my emotional state. Admiral, he reported formally, all systems remain operational and defensive postures have been maintained according to your orders. We detected no hostile activity from the Federation vessel during your absence. I moved to my command throne, settling into the familiar contours of a seat designed to project authority and inspire religious awe rather than provide comfort or facilitate collaboration. The tactical displays showed both ships maintaining their original positions, weapons systems powered but not actively targeting, shields raised in defensive configurations that could be interpreted as either caution or preparation for immediate combat. Status report, I ordered, falling automatically into the familiar patterns of Imperial command protocol, despite carrying memories of radically different approaches to crew management and tactical coordination. Sir, reported Chief Gunner Mordax from the weapons control station, all Lance batteries remain charged and ready for immediate firing. Torpedo tubes are loaded with blessed ordnance and torpedo crews stand ready to engage enemy targets on your command. Commissar Drex moved to his position near the chapel entrance, his stormcoat rustling as he surveyed the bridge crew with professional paranoia. I could see him cataloguing facial expressions and body language, searching for signs of corruption or doubt that might have infected loyal Imperial servants during our absence from proper supervision. "Admiral," Drex announced formally, "I recommend immediate departure from this system to minimize crew exposure to potentially corrupting influences. Extended contact with heretical ideas represents unacceptable risk to unit cohesion and Imperial loyalty." The recommendation was tactically sound according to orthodox Imperial doctrine, yet I found myself hesitating to issue the obvious orders for immediate departure. Everything I had observed aboard the Federation vessel challenged fundamental assumptions about command effectiveness, technological innovation, and the possibility of peaceful coexistence with alien species. "Commissar," I replied carefully, "our orders from Battlefleet Command require comprehensive intelligence gathering regarding anomalous contacts in this sector. Premature departure without complete assessment could be interpreted as failure to execute assigned mission parameters." Drex's eyes narrowed slightly, his training recognizing the kind of rationalization that often preceded ideological compromise in otherwise loyal officers. "Admiral, we have gathered sufficient intelligence to confirm that the Federation represents a form of human civilization that operates outside Imperial doctrine. Further contact serves no legitimate military purpose." Tech Adept Caney approached from the engineering station, his mechanical features displaying data readouts from the hybrid communication system that still linked our vessels. "Admiral, the Federation continues to transmit technical specifications and cultural information. Their data includes technological innovations that could enhance Imperial capabilities if properly adapted to orthodox applications." The mention of technological enhancement through Federation cooperation sent visible tension through the bridge crew. Imperial doctrine taught that innovation outside approved Adeptus Mechanicus parameters led inevitably to the kind of technological rebellion that had nearly destroyed human civilization during the dark age of technology. "What kind of innovations?" I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. Caney's mechadendrites displayed holographic projections showing comparative analysis between Imperial and Federation technologies. "Sir, their shield systems operate at approximately 200% efficiency compared to our void shields, while requiring 60% less power generation. Their faster-than-light communication eliminates the need for astropathic personnel while maintaining superior reliability and transmission speed." Lieutenant Vex stepped forward from his position at the communications array. "Admiral, the Federation has also provided historical data regarding their approach to planetary governance and interspecies relations. Their methods appear to achieve social stability without requiring the level of enforcement measures that characterize Imperial administration." I stared at the tactical implications of what my officers were reporting. The Federation possessed solutions to fundamental problems that the Imperium considered inherently unsolvable through any means other than constant vigilance and overwhelming force. If their approaches were truly effective, it suggested that 10,000 years of Imperial doctrine might be based on incomplete understanding rather than absolute necessity. "Magos Vaughn," I called out to the senior tech adept who had remained aboard to monitor Federation transmissions. "Analysis of their technological offerings. Do you detect any evidence of chaos corruption or Xenos influence in their innovations?" Vaughn's optical mechadendrites focused on the data displays, while his primary consciousness processed vast amounts of technical information through sacred cogitator interfaces. "Admiral," he announced after several minutes of mechanical analysis, "Federation technology appears to operate through pure scientific principles rather than esoteric forces. Their innovations represent advanced engineering rather than heretical deviation from orthodox patterns." Commissar Drex stepped closer to my command throne, his voice carrying the authority of someone speaking on behalf of the Emperor himself. "Admiral, regardless of the apparent benefits offered by Federation technology, accepting innovations from outside Imperial authority represents heretical deviation from proper doctrine. The corruption may be subtle, but it remains corruption nonetheless. And if their innovations could save Imperial lives and enhance our defensive capabilities?" I asked, knowing that the question itself pushed the boundaries of acceptable Imperial thinking. Do we have an obligation to investigate potential improvements to our ability to serve the Emperor? Drex's hand moved to his bolt pistol, not as an immediate threat, but as a reminder of the ultimate consequences for heretical thinking. Sir, our obligation is to maintain purity of thought and action according to established doctrine. Improvement through unauthorized innovation represents the first step toward the kind of technological hubris that led to the Age of Strife. The bridge crew watched our exchange with the nervous attention of people who understood that their own fates might depend on the outcome of this philosophical discussion. Imperial doctrine was clear regarding the consequences for trafficking in heretical ideas, yet practical military concerns suggested that dismissing potentially beneficial innovations without proper evaluation might be equally dangerous. Captain Picard is requesting one final meeting, Lieutenant Vex announced, his augmetic eye displaying incoming communications from the Federation vessel. He offers to provide complete technical specifications for their defensive systems as a gesture of goodwill between our civilizations. The offer represented exactly the kind of technological transfer that could revolutionize Imperial defensive capabilities while simultaneously violating every principle of orthodox innovation doctrine. Accepting such information would require acknowledging that human civilization could develop effective solutions outside Imperial authority structures. Admiral, Commissar Drex said quietly, this is clearly a test of our loyalty to Imperial doctrine. The Federation offers forbidden knowledge precisely because they understand its corrupting potential. We must refuse their offers and depart immediately to prevent further contamination. I looked around my bridge at officers and crew members who had served faithfully under my command for years, noting the confusion and uncertainty in their expressions. 3 days of contact with Federation representatives had planted questions that couldn't be answered through simple recitation of Imperial doctrine. If I ordered immediate departure, we would return to Battlefleet Command with reports of human civilization that had achieved impossible things through methods that contradicted everything we had been taught about survival among the stars. Such reports would likely trigger inquisitorial investigation that could result in the execution of everyone involved. If I authorized continued contact to gather additional intelligence, I risked exposing my crew to ideas that could undermine their faith in Imperial necessity and the Emperor's wisdom. Such exposure could lead to the kind of ideological corruption that destroyed entire sectors through civil war and rebellion. Lieutenant Vex, I ordered, inform Captain Picard that we require additional time to consider his offer. Maintain communication protocols, but suspend data transfer pending further orders. Drex nodded approvingly at my apparent caution, though I could see him continuing to monitor crew reactions for signs of inappropriate interest in Federation offerings. His training taught him that corruption often began with seemingly innocent curiosity about forbidden knowledge. As I sat in my command throne surrounded by the familiar trappings of Imperial authority, I realized that the past 3 days had changed everything about my understanding of human potential and survival requirements. The Federation had demonstrated that alternatives to Imperial methods were not only possible, but potentially superior under certain circumstances, which left me facing the most dangerous question an Imperial officer could confront. If the Emperor's way wasn't the only way to ensure human survival, what did that mean for everything I had devoted my life to defending? The answer to that question would determine not only my own fate, but the future relationship between two radically different approaches to human civilization among the stars.